Hey my friend, and welcome to this masterclass all about self-influence. Now in a few moments I'm going to press play on a 15-minute excerpt from a talk that I gave to a big corporate client of mine, and they were kind enough to give me the footage to be able to share with you. And in this masterclass I'll be sharing with you my rapid influence formula. Now this is my way as an expert mentalist of having deconstructed influence into three simple components, not only to develop influence with others, but also to develop self-influence. This is the exact same influence formula that I was hired to present for NATO. I was the opening keynote speaker for their strategic communications conference in Latvia. Enjoy this masterclass all around rapid influence for self-influence. Would you agree that we are all being influenced by things all the time, and often we are not aware of these things, right? And the other side of that coin is that we are influencing all the time, often in ways that we're unaware of. Would you agree with that? Absolutely. And so the reason I wanted to start with this influence experiment is because it has a lot to do with a very powerful formula that I'm going to share with you so that you can develop predictable influence in your life, not only with other people, but of course it always starts with ourselves. And I'm going to share that with you. That's called my rapid influence formula. But I thought to myself, before I share that with you, let me share a little bit of my story so you at least have the context into kind of how and why I do what I do. Now, for those of you who may follow me online, you may see lots of pictures of Angie and I. We do a lot of travel around the world. It all, I'm really, really grateful for the kind of lifestyle that I'm living. But it wasn't always like this, all right? When I started, this was back in the day. This was just after school. And in fact, when I asked my dad if that was his suit, because it's clearly too big for me, he actually thinks it was his dad's suit, all right? So just to give you an idea of where I came from, I met mentalists when I was a teenager. I was blown away by what they were doing. I thought, I have to be doing this. And I actually nearly failed school. I didn't, nearly failed matric. I'm not proud of that, by the way. If I could go back just to have that sense of character, that discipline, I would do things differently. I've had to mature a lot since then. But that's the way I was. I was like a broke artist living at home with my folks for way too many years, just wanting to do these crazy mentalist stunts, not even knowing how I would turn that into a business, if at all. And then eventually, I did turn it into a business. People would hire me. I would come to events, kind of like the one that I was at IQ Business about 6 years ago, and just doing a lot of entertaining experiments, kind of like the one that we just did. But the thing is, one day somebody said this to me, and it stuck in my mind. And sometimes we just need to hear the right thing at the right time in our life. They said, Gilan, the biggest enemy of a great life is a good life. And that stuck with me. And I thought to myself, I'm living a comfortable life. I'm doing okay. I'm actually doing well. But there's something even bigger out there for me. I don't know if you feel that way. I think that just with the sense of purpose that we have in the room here and these amazing goals, you can see that there is greatness that's waiting for you. So that's when I decided to move from just entertainment into what's called the expert industry, which is where you actually teach stuff, speaker, coach, trainer, and so on. But I was like a young 20-something. I was walking into executives' offices who had like 3 times the amount of life and business experience as me, and saying, I'm going to teach you how to influence, but I had no influence with them. And this is kind of the look on their face. This is what I encountered, hitting wall after wall after wall. And I thought to myself, well, maybe I should just go back to my comfort zone. How many times do we feel when the moment we feel that maybe we're off track and things aren't panning out the way we want, we think, well, let me just go back to what I know. You know, if we're ever in a place where we don't know what to do, often we go back to doing what we know. And that's a red flag. And I said to myself at this point, Gilan, you have 2 options. You can either reach for your excuses or for your dreams. But I knew that the gap between them was too wide. I couldn't hold on to both at the same time. And at some point, you just got to back yourself, right? You just got to go for it. And that's where what I'm about to share with you, it was at this point that this was born. I realized that I needed to create a way to deliberately, predictably develop influence. Now, around this time, I heard a story of a man whose, his story of influence has impacted you, it's impacted me, everyone in this room. And I wonder, in fact, if you actually recognize the guy who I'm going to put on screen right now. Does anyone recognize him? This is Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the man who invented the World Wide Web. Now, at the time that he invented the web, he worked for an organization called CERN. You can see their logo in the top left there. It's the European Organization for Nuclear Research. And he faced a massive challenge. He had to influence his employers at CERN to support him working on this idea called the World Wide Web. Now listen, in hindsight, when we see what the web has done for, for the world, it's like an obvious thing, right? But when they even launched the World Wide Web, the newspaper headlines read, "Worldwide what?" Like no one knew the application or even the implications that it would have. It was a very weird idea. But eventually they said yes, and they supported him working on it. But once he invented the web, he faced an even greater influence challenge. Can you guess what it was? It was to influence his employers to make the World Wide Web available to the public royalty-free. And he still fights for the free web to this day. Now, let me ask you a question. Had he failed to influence his employers, would you agree that the World Wide Web, actually the world that we live in today, would not exist? Do you agree with that? Yes, definitely. And so the lesson that I took out of his story that I want to share with you right now is that so often in life, we have unbelievable ideas. That might be a solution for someone. In terms of leadership, it could be a strategy, it could be a direction. Whatever that idea is, so often in life, the ability to influence others to buy into your ideas is often even more important than the idea itself. Would you agree that there are many amazing ideas out there that could change the world that will never see the light of day because we couldn't create the influence for it? Would you agree with that? We see stories of this all the time, right? And that's why I'm so passionate about influence. I believe that influence, not just influencing others, but influencing ourselves, which we'll touch on primarily in a moment, is the single most important, the single critical skill that we need to develop to be able to move forward, to be able to bridge where we are now and where our goals are. So when I started to develop what is now known as my rapid influence formula and using it, it helped me to grow my business. I've now presented in almost 40 countries around the world at this point. My best-selling book, Persuasion Games, that came out a few years ago, presented at really amazing events like the World Sales Forum, Singularity University, and being the opening keynote speaker for the NATO Strategic Communications Conference in Latvia, speaking to leaders from all over the world, influencers from all over the world. That's what I think of as leaders. And all because of this very simple formula that I'm about to share with you now. So I wanted to give you some context into not just how this formula was born, but also the power of it. Because the last thing that I would want is for you to miss how practical this is and how much power there is in its simplicity just because of its simplicity. Now, this is called my rapid influence formula. I mentioned to you that at that time in my life where I needed to deliberately go out and develop influence, I really wanted to deconstruct influence, to demystify it into very simple, practical components. And what I realized is that there are 3 subconscious questions. You know, as a mentalist, I'm obsessed with what we're thinking, even when we're thinking things we don't realize we're thinking. And there are 3 subconscious questions that other people are thinking about you every single time they interact and engage with you. But because they're subconscious, they don't realize they're asking these questions about you. And the more positively you're able to answer these questions in their minds, the more influence you're going to establish. And the faster you're able to answer those 3 questions, the more rapidly you're able to establish that influence. That's why it's called the rapid influence formula. Now, the 3 questions are unbelievably simple, but when you put them together, as I'll show you, you'll see how it creates what I call transformational influence, which is the ability to influence change in ourselves and others. So here are the 3 questions. And I love Venn diagrams because they show the relationships between things. So here we go. You can see that we're going to build it out. The first question that people's minds are wondering about you is, are you reliable? Can I rely on you? Are you consistent? Right? In many different ways. Are you reliable? The second question that they're asking is, are you capable of helping me? And the third question is, do you care about me? Now, I'm just going to ask that I can hear a lot of conversations going on, and maybe the people at the back don't realize that it's filtering through to the front. Can I just get everyone to bring the noise down? Thank you. Excellent. Thank you. I appreciate that. Now, right in the middle of these three questions is where we find that transformational influence. Now, if you're able to answer, say, one of them, that's better than none, right? But you can see how if you take away any of them, how you're actually going to remove some of the influence. You're not going to reach that influence potential. And of course, I've got care at the bottom that kind of holds up the top two, because I think that that's one of the most important ones. Because if somebody doesn't believe that you've got their best interests at heart, it doesn't matter how reliable, consistent, or capable you are, you're going to lose influence, right? So I'm sharing this formula with you at first in terms of how you influence other people by creating trust, credibility, and support. But ultimately, what I want to share the rest of my time with you about is really how do we use this formula on ourselves. This truly is a universal formula. Not only when it comes to influencing other people, for example, leadership. Leadership is influence. If you think that you're leading people and you turn around and nobody's following you, you're not influencing anyone, right? You're not leading anyone. You're just taking a walk. You have to have followers. You've got to have influence. So in that context, it's highly relevant. If you even think about products or you think about a brand, think about the brands that you absolutely love, that you're so loyal towards. Chances are you believe that they are reliable or consistent, that they're capable of helping you. Maybe it's not to solve a technical or physical problem, but even an emotional, taking you to the next emotional level. And of course, that they care about you. But like I mentioned, the not so obvious application, and what many of us don't realize is that our own minds are asking these three questions about ourselves all the time. Move on right now into what I like to call the inner game of influence. The outer game are our actions and behaviors to influence the other person. And when it comes to that kind of influence, it's like a surgeon's knife. It can be used for great good or for great evil. It depends on the person using the tool, right? The greatest leaders in our time, Nelson Mandela, he was very purposeful about how he created influence, right? It can be used for great good. We also know examples of leaders that were extremely negative. But it all starts with ourselves. You see, even if you thought to yourself, I want to go over and show that I care. And like if you knew, okay, I'm going to do that to create the reciprocation because I know that they're going to appreciate that and then maybe they'll help me. That takes a lot of inner work, right? To be able to lean into that vulnerability. That's the inner game of influence. If we're unable to influence ourselves, we're always going to have a lid, a cap, on how we're able to influence others. When you start developing self-influence, you actually start influencing others from the inside out. It overflows. And so that's really where I want to start. Our purpose here is to influence people, or it's to grow people rather, to grow business and to grow Africa. And I would add a step right in the beginning to say we need to grow ourselves. Because if we don't grow ourselves, how can we grow other people, right? And that's what I want to share with you here today, some practical ways that you'll be able to start growing yourself. So we spoke about the rapid influence formula. When it comes to self-influence, I've already mentioned your mind is asking these questions of yourself all the time. Now, Adam mentioned motivation. He asked the question, are we motivated? And the answer was? Yes. Fantastic. Now, here's the thing. It's amazing energy to be motivated in this room. But what happens in 6 months from now? In 5, in 4? How will we sustain? How will you take responsibility for your motivation? This is where self-motivation comes in. Now, self-motivation really is self-influence. It's to influence yourself to stay motivated when most people's motivation would die. Now, what I've discovered, having presented at large conferences all around the world and seeing the same pattern happen again and again and again, what happens is that motivation tends to go down when our belief goes down. You see, when the numbers are shown and when you have all of that perspective and when you got the plan and you're like, that's the goal and I know I can reach it, it's in line of sight. And at that moment, your motivation is high because you believe that you are on track and you can achieve that goal. But then what happens is life kicks in. And if we don't have the right self-influence in place, the moment we start feeling like we're no longer on track, like maybe we're not going to hit that goal, what lands up happening is it actually starts becoming really difficult to think about that goal. Because who wants to think of a goal all the time that you ultimately don't believe you're going to achieve? It becomes painful. It actually becomes easier to think about distractions or excuses. So, the goal then is to maintain your belief, for us to take ownership of maintaining our belief that we can achieve that goal. And the most powerful belief systems are ones that are evidence-based, which means you can't just say to yourself, I believe. Like, that'll get you so far, right? But your brain will know if you're just trying to speak it out of not believing, right? So the only evidence that really works on yourself is actual actions and behaviors that you develop. Not just the thoughts and saying that you believe, but having the right actions and behaviors in place that through that, you intrinsically believe, you can see that you're on track. And so that's why what I'm going to share with you here is very much actions and behaviors based. So, when it comes to reliability, that's formed through consistency and discipline. As you can see, that is very much action and behavior based, right? You can't just think about doing something, you actually have to do it. When it comes to capability, that's all about growing, learning, developing yourself. And the last one is care, which has a lot to do with your self-perception. And we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. But when you have the right actions and behaviors, that you are consistent, you're reliable, you're disciplined, you do what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it. You're developing that self-trust. When you're growing, you're developing that sense of self-capability. So you're creating credibility with yourself. And of course, that support as well.